Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. Okay, so before I begin, I want to promise you all that this video will have no Bryan Johnson jump scares, but since this video does mention Bryan Johnson, I do have to do it just once for this video. So, at the count of 3, here goes. 3, 2... I promise that's going to be the last time I do this on this video. So, longevity has been a hot topic on social media for a good while now. The vast majority of what we hear about it is of course complete bullshit. Usually when you hear some influencer talking about health and longevity, 99% of the time is going to be some online culture warrior who's masquerading as a health influencer who will claim that the key to living indefinitely is to eat a carnivore diet, avoid seed oils, use a fluoride-free toothpaste, and drink raw milk, as well as avoiding vegetables. Of course, that's all completely wrong, but hundreds of millions of terminally online impressionable idiots have nevertheless fallen for the grift anyways, and it's a real shame because it has made a mockery of what is a very important topic. The human lifespan is far too short. There is no question about it. Human mortality has deprived the world of far too many brilliant minds for far too long. I mean, just think about how beneficial it would be for the world if people like Albert Einstein, Alan Turing, Stephen Hawking, and Nikola Tesla were still around to share their wisdom with us today. Just imagine how much more we could have learned from them if they had been around for another 30, 40, or even 50 more years. These scientific pioneers all changed the world for the better, but they could have done even more if the limitations of the human lifespan didn't deprive our world of them so soon. This is a travesty that we shouldn't as a species have to put up with anymore. Humans should be able to live for as long as they want to live, whether that be 100 years or 10,000 years. The right to exist is a human right that we're all entitled to. And increasing our lifespan won't just make the world a better place by preserving the best and brightest amongst us, it will make the rest of us better people too. I mean, just think about it. People are going to be much more inclined to make the world a better place for the future if they know they're going to live long enough to see the future. This discussion about longevity reminds me of a plot point from what is, in my opinion, the greatest science fiction series ever written, the Mars Trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. Here's actually the 3rd book in the trilogy. This is the hardcover edition of Blue Mars. Fantastic book, but of course you want to start with Red Mars and then Green Mars because it is a trilogy. And I won't spoil anything about the book because these books are must-read. It's an absolute must-read book series. But what the books do is that they chronicle the colonization and terraforming of Mars into a habitable Earth-like world. The first book, Red Mars, begins in the near future where 100 colonists set out to establish a colony with the idea that their descendants would one day see Mars become an Earth-like garden world. Then, a few decades after the colony is established, a medical breakthrough is discovered called gerontological therapy that manages to extend the lifespan of a human being by centuries. Because of this, many of the original colonists lived long enough to see the final culmination of their hard work. They saw Mars start out as a lifeless red rock and then transform into a verdant paradise reminiscent of Earth before it was poisoned by industrialization. This was a beautiful story to me because it perfectly encapsulated my feelings on how I want to see humanity progress as a species. I don't think it is our destiny to just die. I think we can and should do everything we possibly can to extend our lifespan indefinitely so that we can live long enough to colonize the stars. But is this possible? Well, with current technology, no. We can't extend our lifespan by centuries, but that could change in a few decades. Already, we have researchers like Dr. David Sinclair who have successfully reversed aging in mice, so I believe that it will one day happen just like it happened in the Mars Trilogy. I think that science fiction will become a reality sooner than we may think. So what we need to do is simply live long enough so that we get to benefit from this human revolution in medical technology. Even though extending our lifespan by centuries isn't quite a reality yet, it is certainly possible to extend our lifespan by a decade or 2 decades, which may be all the time that stands between death and the discoveries in the near future that lead to our immortality. So what is it we can do right now to maximize our longevity in order to give us a better chance of living long enough to enjoy the benefits of much better life-extending technologies? Well, first, let me go ahead and explain what age is exactly. So let's go over the terminology. The most objective kind of age is chronological age. It's simply how old you are in years since you were born. It's what we normally think of when we talk about someone's age. So when I say I'm 44 years old, for instance, that means that the Earth has orbited the Sun 44 times since I was born. Now technically, at least not with current technology, you can't slow chronological aging because time passes at the same rate all the time, unless of course you travel close to the speed of light and experience time dilation, which is impossible yet. So what I mean by extending chronological aging is simply doing things to make us live longer. So the second type of aging is biological age. The biological age refers to the age of a person's cells, tissues, and organs. Some people just age slower or faster than others based on factors like genetics. Biological age can be determined by both genetic and environmental factors though, and there are some sophisticated lab tests to measure it. So, the third type of age is related to biological age, but it isn't exactly the same thing. It's the perceived age or apparent age, and that's the age someone appears to be. It's not exactly the same thing as biological age because it can be influenced by superficial factors like skin wrinkling or hair loss. In order to actually increase longevity, it is necessary to increase your chronological age. In order to do that, the first order of business is obviously to avoid dying. Obviously, that means avoiding death from factors like accidents, but it also means staying healthy for as long as you possibly can. So to do that, the best thing you can possibly do is to avoid the two largest killers of humanity, which are heart disease and cancer. These diseases take a long time to develop, so oftentimes people will take them for granted until it is too late, or they'll even be fooled into contributing to the problem through social media misinformation, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But as important as living a very long life may be to us, it isn't everything. We are not only interested in increasing our lifespans, we also want to increase our health spans. Improving your health span means you want to keep your body as healthy for as long as you possibly can. So, health span and lifespan have some obvious overlap with each other, since an improved health span means slowing down your biological aging as much as possible. Finally, living a long time is nice, of course, but you probably don't want to end up looking like a wrinkled, bald prune or like Jason Blaha in the process. So you also want to avoid skin aging and hair loss, both of which increase your perceived age. So I'm going to list the top 7 aids to longevity. All these treatments will extend chronological aging by various degrees, but some of the treatments I will mention will also extend biological and perceived aging. These rankings will be in terms of increasing importance, going from number 7 down to number 1. So let's start with number 7. Number 7 is sunscreen. One of the biggest threats to our longevity by far is the immense nuclear reactor located 93 million miles away from us. I'm of course talking about the closest star to us, the sun. Yet these days, we have carnivore idiots on social media telling us that people should try to avoid the sun, or as they like to put it, raw dog the sun and avoid sunscreen altogether. This is all, of course, completely wrong because sunlight contains 3 types of dangerous ultraviolet rays. I'm talking about UVA, UVB, and UVC. UVC is the most dangerous of them all, but thankfully our atmosphere blocks it out completely. UVB is the one that burns your skin. It's also the main culprit behind most skin cancers. UVA penetrates deeper, breaking down collagen and accelerating wrinkles. Both UVA and UVB can damage your DNA, and UVA can damage your skin even if you are indoors or if it is a cloudy day, since it penetrates both clouds and glass. So a broad spectrum sunscreen is your best armor against all these dangerous rays, and you should always use it during the daytime, even if you are indoors, unless you're in a room without windows, of course. And I did a more extensive video on sunscreen that I'll link below. So, as far as photoaging goes, it is UVA that is the most to blame. It penetrates deeply into the skin, and it can damage the dermal extracellular matrix, which means the structural components of the skin that give it firmness and elasticity. Specifically, it damages collagen and elastin, as well as the blood vessels in the skin. The result of all this exposure is wrinkly, saggy, leather-like skin, as well as that tomato face you see on carnivore diet gurus since they're all against sunscreen. There is solid data in the form of randomized controlled studies that show that use of sunscreen prevents skin photoaging, such as this study here that looked at 903 subjects. It found that the daily sunscreen group showed absolutely no evidence of skin aging over a period of 4.5 years, in contrast to the groups not using sunscreen regularly. So sunscreen is extremely effective in preventing photoaging of the skin, but it also has been shown to prevent skin cancers, and that's because sunscreen blocks not just UVA light, but also UVB light. UVB light doesn't penetrate the skin as well, and it is blocked by clouds and glass. However, it is the form of light that leads to the most DNA damage, and so can also cause cancer. So sunscreen doesn't just make you look younger, it helps extend your life too by preventing things like skin cancer. There are many high-quality studies, meaning randomized controlled trials, that show that the frequent use of sunscreen reduces the incidence of skin cancer of different varieties significantly. So, I'm not going to say much more about sunscreen today because I did a whole video on it that I'll link below, but the best way to think about sunscreen is that it is to your skin what Finasteride is to your hair or what toothpaste is for your teeth. Sunscreen is an absolutely essential component to any longevity stack that anyone who is serious about prolonging their life should be using on a daily basis. So let's go ahead and move on to number 6. So number 6 is sleep optimization. Okay, so this is something you hear talked about more and more recently on social media, and honestly, chums, I used to be kind of skeptical about it, but if you think about it though, sleep definitely serves a very important function, or else it would not be something that all mammals do. So everyone has the experience of feeling sluggish when they don't get enough sleep, and sometimes they feel bad when they get too much sleep. However, it's only been in recent years that it's been shown that getting the optimal amount of sleep can not only make you feel good, but also improve longevity. Here is a study from Asia that looked at the sleep duration of 322,721 subjects and examined the mortality rate over an average of about 14 years of follow-up. The study found that in men, the ideal sleep duration was 7 hours. Anything more or less than that causes an increase in mortality from heart disease, cancer, or other causes. The study found similar results for women too, except for in the case of mortality from cancer, where 8 to 9 hours of sleep seemed to be optimal. The most commonly reported duration of sleep was actually 8 hours, which is what people in the past recommended, but now it looks like a slightly shorter duration of 7 hours may be better. Me personally, I try to go to bed around 11:30 every night, and I wake up at 6:30 in the morning, so 7 hours of sleep usually makes me feel great. One other finding in this study was that younger men were affected by either lack of sleep or too much sleep more than older men, meaning men over 65 years old. Age didn't seem to make much of a difference in the effect of sleep duration in women, though. There is also a study that shows that the regularity of sleep may be even more important of a factor than the duration of sleep in decreasing mortality. It's this study right here. The study looked at the sleep patterns of 60,977 subjects followed for a period of almost 8 years. Sleep regularity was assessed by comparing the similarity of sleep patterns from one day to the next. Like in the previous study I showed, the study found that both short and long sleep durations were associated with increased mortality. However, the strongest predictor of mortality was how consistent the sleep was. Now, we don't have enough data to prove beyond a doubt that lack of sleep causes poor health. It's also very possible that poor health leads to poor sleep, or even that illness makes people sleep more. The studies I've mentioned use statistical techniques to reduce these confounding factors, but they can't completely eliminate them. It's also nearly impossible to run randomized control trials where you force people to sleep a set number of hours for years, so the best data we're likely to get will come from long-term observational studies. Still, we know that serious sleep disturbances harm health, so it's logical that getting adequate sleep is beneficial. Sleep is when the body resets hormone cycles, clears waste from the brain via the lymphatic system, repairs DNA, and restores itself. That's why regular consistent sleep can help slow biological aging, not just increase your chronological age. I know it can be very difficult in today's world to shut out distractions and to get enough rest, but prioritizing sleep is one of the simplest, proven steps you can do for longevity. If you're having trouble, one of the best things you can probably do is quit caffeine, since caffeine can disturb sleep, and I actually made a video about the benefits of quitting caffeine, which I'll link below. So, next up, number 5, exercise. Exercise is obviously a big factor in longevity, as many people might expect, and maybe it should be higher than number 5. I mean, you could even make a case for it being number 1, but I'll go ahead and leave it at number 5 for now. Exercise slows biological aging, and because of its benefits on cardiovascular function, it can prevent dying from heart disease, and thus it can extend your lifespan. It turns out that both resistance training and cardiovascular training slow down the aging process, but if you really want to get the most anti-aging benefits out of exercise, then you should probably do both. The effects of exercise on longevity have been very well studied and documented by using prospective cohort studies, randomized controlled trials, and meta-analyses, and the results are all consistent. They show that regular exercise prolongs your life. Here are some of the many benefits of exercise that have been documented in studies. The table is far too long to go over completely, but here are some of the highlights. Exercise reduces systemic inflammation and stabilizes atherosclerotic plaques. It improves regulation of the heart by the autonomic nervous system. It has beneficial effects on cardiac risk factors like lowering LDL cholesterol and triglycerides, as well as increasing HDL cholesterol. It lowers blood pressure and reduces insulin resistance. It improves cardiac function, lung function, skeletal function, muscle function, and brain function, and that's just a small sample of the many, many benefits of exercise. There's research to back all this up too. For example, here are graphs showing the relationship between physical activity and the risk of developing high blood pressure or the risk of getting type 2 diabetes. People often think that a aerobic training is the most important factor for longevity, but resistance training is also very important since it prevents muscle loss that's related to age, known as sarcopenia, which is a marker of biological aging. Muscle strength has a direct correlation to longevity. You can see this in this graph that plots grip strength against the relative risk of dying, and this graph is based on a meta-analysis of 42 studies. In fact, meta-analyses show that combining resistance training with aerobic exercise yields the best reduction in mortality overall. This meta-analysis of 1,430 studies showed that resistance training alone lowered total mortality by 21%, but resistance training combined with aerobic exercise lowered it by a whopping 40%. The good news, chums, is that you don't even have to do a ton of exercise in order to get the health benefits out of it. Even what I would consider to be a minimal amount of exercise is indeed beneficial for longevity. For example, it used to be said that people need to walk at least 10,000 steps a day, but new research shows that walking just 7,000 steps a day has remarkable effects on longevity. This study was just published last month. It is a meta-analysis of 57 different studies, and it found that walking 7,000 steps a day versus walking just 2,000 steps per day reduced all-cause mortality by 20%, and it reduced mortality from cardiovascular disease by an incredible 47%. So that's a huge benefit from what I consider to be a pretty small amount of exercise. So the evidence that exercise delays biological aging and improves longevity is very strong, overwhelming in fact. Out of all the interventions I'm listing here, it is the strongest lifestyle predictor of longevity. Exercise improves your VO2 max, muscle mass, mitochondrial function, and cardiovascular health, and yes, it can even stop hair loss, especially if you're doing lower body movements like squats and calf raises. That means that there's no excuse for skipping leg day. Don't believe me? Then ask Magic Bold. Okay, so let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is fasting. It might be surprising, but just simply fasting every now and then has been shown to slow biological aging. Fasting has been shown to extend lifespan in animal models, and it improves aging biomarkers in human beings. It reduces insulin levels, inflammation, and generally improves metabolic health. One way fasting works is by increasing autophagy, which is a process where damaged and aging cell components are cleared out of your system. I did a video on fasting and autophagy that I'll link below, and look at that. I even pronounced the word autophagy correctly this time. There are different ways to fast, of course, and some of them are extreme, involving days without food, and sometimes people even abstain from water, which of course I think is incredibly stupid. However, I don't think any of this is necessary, as there is strong evidence that intermittent fasting may work just as well as other more challenging forms of fasting. Evidence to support fasting as a way to prolong longevity comes from studies like this one here. In mice, it was found that periodic fasting resulted in an 11% increase in the median lifespan. A similar diet in humans was found to reduce inflammation, improve glucose tolerance, and positively affect biomarkers of aging. Fasting a few days every few weeks can be difficult, but intermittent fasting, like we already talked about, is relatively easy to do and still gives good results. It has been shown to lower glucose and insulin levels, as well as to lower inflammation, decrease fatty liver, and improve your cardiovascular risk profile. So we're not talking about weeks of fasting here, chums, or even days. Simply confining your eating pattern to 10 hours a day and fasting for 14 hours per day has been shown to improve longevity. That's a fasting regimen that many people already do, even if unconsciously. If you eat 3 meals a day during the daytime and don't eat at night, you may already be doing intermittent fasting without realizing it. Even if you just skip breakfast, you might already be doing that. So this really is not as hard as it sounds, and it can improve both your health span and your lifespan. So next, let's go on to number 3, and this one's going to be my favorite topic: 5-AR blockers. Of course, if you've been following my channel, you won't be surprised that I put 5-AR blockers on this list, but you may be surprised that I didn't put them at the number 1 spot. So let me go ahead and explain that. Like sunscreen, 5-AR blockers decrease perceived age because hair loss makes you look older, of course. Hair loss commonly occurs as we get older due to a common process called senescent alopecia, and that happens whether or not you have androgenetic alopecia. I mean, that's just something that is associated with age in general. Androgenetic alopecia looks almost exactly the same as senescent alopecia, though, but it occurs in young men in their 20s. The result of this is that young men with androgenetic alopecia will end up looking like old men well ahead of their time. This is a cruel trick of nature due to the trash hormone DHT. But in addition to making you look better, Finasteride and dutasteride are being shown to be effective agents that extend the human lifespan by preventing many diseases. In fact, in the book 2012, written by the sci-fi author Kim Stanley Robinson, who also wrote the Mars Trilogy that I brought up earlier in this video, it is proposed that a longevity treatment of the future would involve suppressing the 5AR gene through genetic engineering. But with the wide availability of 5AR inhibitors, this is no longer just the realm of science fiction. We can make this a reality today by taking either finasteride or dutasteride. Most notably, finasteride and dutasteride have been shown to decrease the incidence of prostate cancer overall. At first, there were concerns that these drugs, despite lowering the risk of prostate cancer overall, could nevertheless increase the risk of more serious forms of prostate cancer, but that claim has proven to be false. In fact, finasteride lowers overall mortality in prostate cancer, and there is research that proves it. In addition to that, finasteride has been shown to lower the risk of many other cancers as well, and it also lowers the levels of LDL cholesterol in humans, as well as prevents atherosclerosis in mice. So, 5AR blockers not only restore a youthful appearance by restoring hair growth, they also potentially help prevent some of the major causes of death, specifically certain forms of cancer and heart disease. I talk a lot more about the longevity benefits of finasteride in my Bryan Johnson playlist, so I'll go ahead and link that playlist below. But the bottom line here, chums, is that one of the reasons men don't live as long as women do is because of diseases that feed off of androgens, and the primary culprit here is not testosterone, it is DHT, which 5AR inhibitors suppress. So, anyone who is serious about longevity definitely needs to be considering suppressing the 5AR enzyme, and that's regardless of whether or not they have hair loss. It will benefit anyone. Alright. So next up we have number 2. Number 2 is rapamycin and metformin. There are a number of drugs being investigated that can slow biological aging. Rapamycin and metformin are the most promising of these drugs so far. Now, I'm not recommending these drugs for general use just now, though I wouldn't be surprised if Bryan Johnson is already taking them. But even if the research into these drugs is still kind of preliminary, I nevertheless think that these are the future of anti-aging treatments, and that's because they have the potential to stop the biological clock in our cells. In fact, I already did a video on rapamycin that I'll link below. So, what is rapamycin? Well, rapamycin is a drug originally discovered in soil bacteria from Easter Island, and it's currently used in medicine to prevent organ transplant rejection and to coat cardiac stents. But in the last 2 decades, it has also become one of the most promising compounds for extending lifespan in laboratory animals. Rapamycin works by inhibiting a protein complex in cells called mTOR, which is short for mechanistic target of rapamycin. mTOR is a key regulator of cell growth, nutrient sensing, and protein synthesis. When nutrients are abundant, mTOR is active and drives cell growth and proliferation. When nutrients are scarce, though, mTOR activity decreases, shifting the body towards maintenance and repair. Chronic overactivation of mTOR causes accelerated aging, while intermittent inhibition of mTOR promotes cellular repair, autophagy, and metabolic resilience. Animal studies have shown that rapamycin extends lifespan in animal models such as mice, and this happens even when treatment is started late in life. It also improves markers of aging such as heart function, immune function, and cognitive performance. So it's kind of like getting the benefits of fasting in a pill form, which is pretty awesome if you think about it. In human beings, clinical data is still pretty limited, but small trials do suggest that rapamycin can improve immune responses in older adults and reduce age-related decline in organ systems. However, because rapamycin can suppress parts of the immune system and cause side effects like elevated blood sugar and cholesterol, it's still considered experimental for anti-aging use. So, unfortunately, this drug is something you'd have to use at your own risk. Metformin, on the other hand, is another anti-aging drug that comes up pretty frequently in discussions on longevity. Metformin, in fact, is one of the most widely prescribed drugs in the entire world since it is used to treat type 2 diabetes, which is very common. But early on, researchers noticed that people taking metformin for diabetes often live longer, not just compared to other diabetics, but sometimes even compared to non-diabetics, which is pretty remarkable since diabetes in general dramatically shortens a person's lifespan. Metformin's main action is to reduce glucose production in the liver and improve insulin sensitivity, lowering blood sugar levels. But beyond blood sugar control, metformin appears to activate AMPK, which is an energy-sensing enzyme in cells. AMPK activation promotes fat metabolism, reduces inflammation, and enhances autophagy. It also indirectly inhibits mTOR, which is the same pathway targeted by rapamycin, but more mildly. So, metformin has anti-aging effects, though it might not be as strong as rapamycin. But on the other hand, metformin has been thoroughly tested in human beings, and it has been shown to be a safe compound. Human studies have linked metformin use with reduced rates of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline. In animal models like mice, metformin extends lifespan and improves the amount of time the mice stay in good health. There is currently a human trial of metformin going on right now, in fact, called the TAME trial, which stands for Targeting Aging with Metformin. The study is designed to test whether metformin can delay the onset of multiple age-related diseases in non-diabetic older adults. So, of the two drugs, rapamycin is a more potent mTOR inhibitor. However, metformin is a very commonly used drug and has a well-known safety profile, so it is more available and more widely used than rapamycin by quite a good margin. However, I think both drugs probably come closest to what we think about when we're talking about things like anti-aging drugs that slow down the biological clocks in our bodies. I'm pretty sure Bryan Johnson already has one or both of these drugs on his list of daily medications already, though it's hard to know sometimes as he keeps changing his regimen. Anyways, I think it's time that we tame the biggest killer of humanity on the planet, specifically atherosclerotic heart disease, and to do that, we need proper pharmaceutical interventions. So, the number one best thing you can possibly do for maximizing the human lifespan is controlling LDL cholesterol with diet, statins, and PCSK9 inhibiting drugs. The biggest killer of the human species is heart disease, and the greatest intervention so far ever invented to prevent heart disease is to lower serum LDL cholesterol. So, I've talked about LDL cholesterol in several videos that I'll link below, so I won't go over all the evidence again here. There is a strong correlation, though, between LDL cholesterol and the degree of atherosclerosis in the heart, and lowering LDL cholesterol levels by any means, whether it be by diet or drugs, results in decreased risk of dying from heart disease. So, as far as diet goes, the diet that has the best evidence for preventing heart disease is the Mediterranean diet. It is a diet that is high in vegetables, fiber, nuts, and olive oil. It includes some fish, however, it mostly excludes red meat, which is probably one of the reasons why it is so heart healthy. You see, prehistoric humans lost a gene called NEU5GC about 2 to 3 million years ago, and the loss of that gene meant that humans cannot process red meat without increasing their risk of atherosclerosis. And I talked about that in my carnivore diet video that I'll link below. So, instead of being high in saturated fats that promote heart disease like the carnivore diet, the Mediterranean diet is rich in monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids that have been shown to lower the risk of heart disease, especially compared to saturated fat. In fact, studies done on the Mediterranean diet show that it reduces cardiovascular mortality by 31% compared to a low-fat diet. And if you want more data about how reducing your saturated fat consumption will reduce your risk of heart disease, I'll go ahead and link my cholesterol video down below, which I highly recommend you watch because it's excellent. I mean, not to toot my own horn, but it kind of is really good. However, it's important to remember that LDL cholesterol levels are not just linked to diet, but also to our genes. So therefore, diet alone is usually not enough to get the LDL cholesterol levels down to optimal levels. And when I say optimal levels, I mean it should be below 70, because once LDL levels are at 70 or below, the risk of heart disease plummets dramatically. So to get your LDL cholesterol that low, there are drugs like statins, as well as even more powerful drugs such as PCSK9 inhibitors that can help with that. All these interventions lower LDL cholesterol levels, and the amount of benefit in preventing cardiovascular mortality is directly dependent on the amount of LDL cholesterol lowering from whatever intervention you're using. Between the two drugs, PCSK9 inhibitors are the most potent, so if you want to reduce your risk of heart disease as much as you possibly can, then you should consider including a PCSK9 inhibiting drug into your stack. Of course, keep in mind, chooms, these are prescription drugs, and like all other prescription drugs, there are some risks. So whether or not you should go on these drugs should be something that's discussed with your doctor, unless of course you're Bryan Johnson, because he can do whatever he wants, because you know he's the God Emperor of Arrakis. So probably the most important thing Bryan Johnson or anyone else could do to prolong their life is to lower their serum LDL cholesterol by diet, and if necessary by drugs too. And knowing how Bryan Johnson is, I'm willing to bet that he probably already is on a statin or a PCSK9 inhibiting drug, as he probably should be, because if you want to live forever, then the most logical thing you can possibly do is take something that helps prevent the development of the most common cause of human death, which is heart disease. So these are my 7 recommendations for increasing the human lifespan that cover all aspects of aging, including extending your chronological age, as well as lowering your biological and apparent age. However, I think the research in this field is really just beginning. I believe with the use of gene editing, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence, we will eventually get to the stage where aging will be like any other disease we've already conquered, like tuberculosis and smallpox, and I also wish I could have said measles too, which would have been true up until recently. Anyways, like I said, there is nothing currently available that will increase the human lifespan by centuries, so the real goal here should be to prolong it by just a couple of decades in order to allow science just enough time to make the medical breakthroughs that will allow us to live long enough to colonize the solar system and then eventually the stars too. And I know it sounds really optimistic, but I don't think we're that far off. So I think it would be especially frustrating if we were to die off just a few years before this medical breakthrough happens. So even if the things I mentioned in this video only give you like 10 or 20 more years of life, that could very well be the difference between living a single human lifespan or 10 human lifespans. So I think it is worth doing whatever we possibly can to extend our lives as long as possible, because life really is too short and we shouldn't have to accept that. Alright, thank you for watching Hair Loss Switchers. I will be back with some more content soon. God bless.